So today we're going to dive deep into just one court case, Keenan versus Brown. And trust me, what starts as a really tragic accident becomes this fascinating legal puzzle. It really makes you think, where does your own personal responsibility end and a property owner's duty to keep you safe actually begin? Just imagine this for a second. It's a perfect summer night. You're at a friend's cottage by the lake. But then, in a split second, one decision, a single dive, just shatters everything. It leads to this life-altering tragedy and kicks off a legal battle that would go all the way to the Court of Appeal. All right, so let's get the facts straight, because nobody disputes what happened that night. It's August 6th, 2001. A 22-year-old guy, Courtney Keenan, he's had a few beers at the Browns' cottage. It's late, around 2 a.m., and he's out on the dock. He sees two of his friends in the water, and to him, it totally looks like they're standing up. So he dives in. But the water, it's incredibly shallow, only about 2.5 feet deep. The impact was just devastating, and it left him a tetraplegic. And right there, that's the moment this personal tragedy turns into this incredibly complex legal fight. The courts were left with this one huge question they had to untangle. Who, if anyone, is legally to blame for what happened? So the battle lines were drawn pretty much immediately. Courtney Keenan sued the homeowners, the Browns, for negligence. He basically argued they failed to keep him safe. The Browns, though, they fired right back, denying they had any responsibility at all for his injuries. And you know, this case makes you ask a much bigger question, one that really applies to anyone who owns a home or has ever been a guest at someone's house. How does the law actually figure out who's at fault when an accident like this happens? So the court's first move was to find a starting point, a legal foundation, and they landed on this concept called the duty of care. This became like the first major clue in solving this whole legal puzzle. Okay, so what in the world is a duty of care? Well, to put it simply, it's a legal obligation to take reasonable steps to not cause harm to other people. And for a court to say it exists, they're looking for two key things. First, was the harm foreseeable? Like, could you see it coming? And second, was there proximity? Which is just a fancy legal way of saying, was there a close enough relationship between the people involved? So, the big question, did the Browns owe Courtney Keenan a duty of care? The court said, absolutely, yes. And here's why. They invited guests to their cottage, which has an inherent risk, the lake. They built and controlled the dock. They knew the water was shallow, so an injury was totally foreseeable. But here's the real kicker. Mrs. Brown herself admitted in court that they would typically warn strangers about the shallow water. That right there proves they knew it was a danger. Okay, but just because the Browns had a duty of care, that doesn't automatically mean they were 100% to blame. The law has a way of dealing with situations where the injured person might have also played a role in what happened to them. And this is where the case gets really interesting. And yep, here's the twist. In court, under oath, Courtney Keenan himself said it. The quote was, "I was careless." I mean, wow, that's a huge moment. A direct admission that his own actions played a part in this whole tragedy. The Browns' lawyers jumped on this, arguing the danger was obvious. They said diving into water you don't know at night after you've been drinking was just foolhardy. But the judge saw it differently. He found that the danger was not obvious at all. In fact, it was more like a hidden trap. Seeing his friends in the water, with it lapping up around their necks, created this powerful and really misleading visual cue that the water was plenty deep. So you've got fault on both sides. How did the court split the blame? Well, the judge basically said it was impossible to figure out if one side was more to blame than the other. And when that happens, the law, specifically something called the Contributory Negligence Act, says you have to split the liability right down the middle. So the final call was 50% fault for the Browns and 50% for Keenan. But wait, the story is not over. The Browns were not happy with that 50-50 split. So they took their case to the Court of Appeal, hoping to get the whole thing overturned. This is the final chapter, the one that would end up setting a precedent for years to come. So the Browns built their appeal on 4 main arguments. First, they tried again to say they didn't owe any duty of care, although they actually gave up on that point at the hearing. Second, they said the standard of care the judge expected was way too high. Third, they claimed that even if they didn't warn him, that's not what caused the injury. And finally, they argued that the 50-50 split was just plain wrong. So, what was the final verdict? The Court of Appeal was not convinced by any of it. The appeal was dismissed. The original judge's decision, including that 50-50 split of liability, was upheld. The judgment stands. So why does any of this matter to the rest of us? Well, the Court of Appeal left us with this really powerful statement. They wrote that because of this case, cottage dwellers will now have to reevaluate the precautions to be taken to avoid a foreseeable risk of harm. See, this wasn't just about the Browns anymore. It was a clear warning to every single property owner out there.
In the end, this case leaves us with this really tough question, doesn't it? You have a young man who made a careless mistake and a family that failed to warn him about a hidden danger they knew about. It really forces all of us to think, in our own lives, where do we draw that line between being responsible for our own actions and a host's basic duty to keep us safe from harm?